Kari, you talked about resistance in your opening remarks. Your response to this new reality.
I think the first thing I'd like to say is that I consider this, what I call this global shift of power from the north and west to the east and south, to be not only a most positive development, but to have within the makings the changing, a really eventually a transformation of this world. But what I said before, which was the concentration of corporate and financial power, I think it is very much concentrated within our countries. Europe, United States, Canada, one or two other such. But the fact that over half of the actual production of the world now takes place in the global south, including China. The increase in South-South trade, which is quite remarkable. It has tipped a balance. The role of China, I think, is very positive within the South. It opens possibilities of trade in both directions, not only Chinese buying people's raw materials, but also finding markets for African and other countries' goods in China. The Chinese operate without regard of the political complexion, the ideology, or the human rights record of the countries they deal with. They deal with the government, they make an exchange, they want rights to mineral or whatever resources. They say, well, we will build you such and such structures. So that it is a bargain. It does not presume to be aid. And in fact, I think that makes their position stronger. Because, you know, the problem with aid is that we don't like to receive it, personally. None of us. Nobody likes. We appreciate it, we need to be helped, but we don't really like it. We like to be independent. I can tell you I've been that way all my life, and I'm almost 90 years old, and I'm going to continue to be that way. And if at times it means that one standard of living goes down and you have to work a little harder, you're going to do it just for your independence. So while I'm not really rambling, I'm trying to say something about development and about the development industry of which you are a part here, and all the platform here is a part. There is a basic problem. And the basic problem is, in my view, I've often said it, that ultimately the development, social, economic, all that excitement that bubbles up when you see that the development is taking place, is an indigenous process from within a society. And it cannot be either imposed or guided or whatever really externally. So the role of aid, and I think it can be positive, and the civil society organizations positive, but what I am begging is to see this in a larger perspective and to see, widen the economic horizons, not even go back just the 19th century. This country of China was the most humiliated civilization in the world. It was also the oldest. And so much of the energy of this high-growth economy in China does come from the fact that a people, a nation, is seeing their return to the world stage. These things matter. The love of country, pride of country, nation, they are important. And a development agenda that, or a development theories, like lots of them, that only look at individual and only look at the poor. And that's the next thing. People really do not like to be thought of as poor, even though they may be so. So what I'm saying that this rise of the global south, the BRICS, not only the BRICS, including China, we should look at very positively, and we should realize that we of the North are beginning to be a problem particularly the mining companies. And as a civil society here, it may not be easy, but what you may have to do is to really take up the challenge and go out in the Canadian public and explain to people what these companies are doing there. Go against the stream. I have just yesterday, was it yesterday? Yesterday was Tuesday, the day before. I was in Montreal, and I went to and stood for 2.5 hours watching streams and streams and streams of students and people. And you could see that they may be going against the stream, but at this time they're beginning to turn the tide. So that's all I have to say.
I'm going to let Richard and Joe have brief comments, and I will move the conversation on to another topic.
I think for me, it's a brief comment, but I have a problem in my mind. I get disturbed by the idea that China is in Africa because it wants to get money. It's there for economic interests and not for human rights. I get disturbed by that idea because I don't know on what platform you can negotiate with people who are powerless, whose only hold to life is their land. You displace 2,000 people, you plant trees, or you mine gold, or you mine something, and you say, I'm here because I am a businessman, and I don't really care about you. I get disturbed by that logic. I don't understand how in the world we can sit down and listen to that kind of logic. For me, the challenge is, unless as a world we start thinking a little bit more deeply about the kinds of relationship we build as we consume, we are not going to make ourselves understood by anybody. I have a case in my country. One of my members, I chair their board. They are nearly being closed because the Minister of Internal Affairs says they and Oxfam did a study that showed that 2,000 people were got off their land, and the New Forest Company from London was putting up trees. Now, this is a case where New Forest Company went to IFC, the World Bank, got money, planted trees. Very good. But 2,000 families have nowhere to go. Where do they go? You want to do your business, you want to do your economic interests, you think you are doing a good thing, but 2,000 families have nowhere to go. How do you put that in the equation? And that is something that business people must be able to talk about. We cannot just talk about business interests as if this world will reinvent itself into a business enterprise. And I think that's the challenge that we are faced with for us when I talk about China, when I talk about human rights. And you see, it's so disheartening because what happens is that you get into a country and all you have are all kinds of dictators running to China to make deals. Mugabe is always in China, Museveni is in China, Equatorial Guinea, Sassou Nguesso is in China. I mean, all the dictators we have on the continent who have ruled for over 30 years are all friends of China. Now, it may be good that China is doing a good thing for Africa, but I don't see the good. So for me, I don't want to complicate this thing because I sit here and it looks nice, but I think it's a terrible thing to think about what can happen to an individual who is having to encounter a huge multinational power, and they can't do anything about that. And that's where I want to use the debate.
We like the way you complicate things. Joe, briefly.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. First, just to come back to what Richard said, and some of you have heard this before from me, but it struck me at the time. I was in South Africa in January of 2010, or 11, I'm sorry, and met with a number of officials of the South African government. And they told me that in the previous 18 months there had been 4 visits, high-level delegations from China to South Africa. And these were not from the government, these were from the Communist Party, which was interesting. And they were asking consistently on these 4 visits to the South African government, how are our investors being viewed in the SADC group of countries? How are we being perceived? And the message the South Africans were giving the Chinese are obviously listening to them, and I presume still is, well look, when it comes to oil and gas, you're compared with the majors generally. Okay, so the large oil companies. But when it comes to everything else, arable land, water, other extractives, you're being increasingly compared with Brazil, India, Turkey, and other investors. And you're being increasingly compared unfavorably with those countries. Why? Because you tend to do things very opaquely. Your companies, as Richard has said, negotiate with the head of state or with a particular minister, and you do it opaquely. The Brazilians, the Indians, and others are more transparent. Not enough, but more transparent. So you're being viewed less favorably. And by the way, Chinese, you should understand that today there are 23. 15 years ago, there were 3 functioning democracies in sub-Saharan Africa. Today, there are 23. And in democracies, there's generally a call for civil society. Civil society grows, and a call for greater transparency. So that is happening. And the South Africans are playing an important role, as are others, I'm sure, in communicating to the Chinese. And we'll see what happens in China with the Party Congress and the changes in leadership. But I do share some of Richard's concern. I've seen it myself in a number of countries where I work. The second thing which Richard mentioned, which is very important, which we haven't talked about, is we need, and this is an important role for NGOs, to look at the whole concept of growth globally. And it's central to development. I was recently at a meeting in Europe, which was hosted by something called the Global Growth Dialogue, and there were a number of prominent economists there. It was co-chaired by Michael Spence, the Nobel Prize laureate. And we were looking at alternative growth paradigms. That was the theme of the conference, alternative growth paradigms. And there was a recognition that the existing growth models are not working. They're creating the kinds of problems that Kari has referred to. Widening income inequality, job poor and jobless growth, a fraying of social cohesion, and therefore we need to look at at an alternative growth model. I made the point myself, because I was asked to address this issue of social cohesion and growth, that what we need to do is start developing different metrics for measuring growth. And those metrics can't be just income-based. They can't be just monetarily based. We need to look not just at the quantity of growth, but, and this is the point that Richard was making, but also the quality of growth. And ensure that if we're going to have growth, that it's sustainable, it's responsible, and it's more equitable and more inclusive. And I think that's the key to development going forward, especially with this growing global middle class, which is creating a huge demand and will continue to create a huge demand on natural resources. And that's going to produce conflict.
This is